So, first off, there's a reason why people don't come out to vote.
Mm.
One is lack of trust in the electoral process, and you
Okay.
can't blame people,
Mm.
really, because why should they spend and waste their time,
Mm.
to participate in a process that does not guarantee,
Mm.
the integrity?
Mm.
That's one. Secondly, a lot of times people are not coming out to cast their vote because of the failure of governance.
Mm.
And that democracy is not delivering its promise of improvements in their socioeconomic conditions. So there's no connection between, voting and the quality of life. And thirdly, is the fact that when you have this zero-sum nature of our politics, it increases the tempo and the temperature of politics.
All right. Thank God it's Friday. It's another Friday. State of the Nation, we call it. But then, we promised you that we'll be running a 5-part series on electoral reforms in Nigeria. We've done 4 already. Time goes so fast. Yes. We started with Peter Aka, around the poll. Yeah. He said it the way he saw it. And it was fantastic revelation there. We followed with Barrister Festus Oguche, most revealing also. Then went to a lawyer who is a politician, the former Attorney General of Benue State, Dr. Alex Adumta. And just last week, we had the legal salamander, Samuel Okutekpa, And today, we have the most indefatigable Samson Itodo of Yiaga Africa. Samson, welcome to State of the Nation on Atlanta Discourse Channel. I'm sure Samson is not new to so many of you, especially when it comes to the issue of elections. He's monitored election in so many countries of the world, South Africa, Sierra Leone, name it. So he's in a fantastic position to tell us what needs to be done in the Nigerian system. So I'm going to start with electoral integrity. That's something that's not very, we're not at prime position with it. People are complaining. In the past, elections used to be free but not fair, but now it looks like they're not fair, and we never know. So what do you think needs to be done as a matter of urgency to boost electoral integrity going forward?
Well, thank you very much, Ade, for having me, and it's such a delight to be here. What do I think needs to be done to fix the problem of our elections?
Yeah,
I'll just say 3 things.
The integrity of the election, yeah.
Yeah, the first point I would make is that until politicians change their attitude towards politics, we're not going to make any headway. The biggest problem that we face is the attitude of politicians that you need an election rigging plan to win elections, that you cannot win elections just on the merit and through a free and is a dominant belief in the political class. And that itself is problematic. And so you might say you don't blame some of these politicians because, like you said, if you don't rig, just know that your opponent is. Sometimes I think it's a myth. It's not a reality. But this is the ways to approach elections. So that needs to change. The second point tied to this is that when you have elections, as an auction and no longer a contest of ideas and strong mobilization for votes, we would end up with what we have. Because what has happened over the last 2 decades is that our electoral process has been so commodified. And so it's just people who are the highest bidders and the highest spenders that are determining electoral outcomes. And that defeats the entire purpose of popular participation or the expression of unadulterated choice that people make at the ballot. And for me, the third part of this is that you cannot have a system where the winner takes all. In a pluralistic society like Nigeria, very diverse. You maintain this full majority, or once you secure majority of lawful votes and the spread, you take everything. And then someone who also toiled and worked hard to get at least, a considerable number of votes is left without nothing. That's not how you share power. And so when you see, how politicians approach the electoral process, these are the foundational issues that we don't address them. Whatever proposal I'm going to make moving forward, I don't think that it will deliver long-lasting impact. What you probably see are just ephemeral reforms. So for instance, let us make INEC independent. The INEC chairman, national commissioners, resident electoral commissioners are appointed by by the president. We're just in a transition currently with the INEC chair, and the president has unilaterally nominated an individual, even though, yes, Professor Joe Samukiton does have the credentials, does have what it takes, but that entire process is devoid of citizens' participation. So we need to unbundle INEC and remove the power to appoint the chair of INEC from the president and vest it into another independent body. And then several proposals. The second thing that needs to be done is the weakest link in our electoral process is our results management process. That is where all the manipulation happens. And so whether it's electronic transmission of results or of results, it is important that at this point that those two proposals are made an integral part of our electoral process and they are contained in the law. So compulsory electronic transmission is really critical for our electoral process. And maybe the last point I will make with respect to what needs to be done, to fix our our electoral process or deepen electoral integrity is the fact that, yes, technology, yes, you unbundle INEC, but if you don't deal with the question of electoral impunity, and in this case, if you don't have institutions that sanction bad behavior of politicians, you would continue to have all forms of electoral impunity. And the call for the establishment for electoral system to deal with the question of electoral impunity.
Oh, wow. Yeah. My next question is on voter apathy. But before I go into that, so when you spoke about winner takes all shouldn't be the case. For example, the last election, the president of today, I think, had about 38%. So are you recommending a parliamentary style of government, or like the French style? The French system is partly parliamentary, partly presidential. What's your recommendation? How do you think power can be shared?
As a student of constitutional law, I say every system of government that no system is insulated from capture, no system is insulated from interference. You choose parliamentarianism that, really hinges on separation or fusion of power. Yes, to a large extent, you might say that, yes, that would have been expended in a presidential system of government. But it also has its own inherent faults. Our presidential system is quite expensive. In fact, we're actually practicing a modified one because when you look at the whole concept of devolution of power across the component units, and in this case at the level, you discover they only have unilateral, unicameral legislature. Unlike places like the US, where they're all bicameral legislature at the state, and then same is replicated, at the federal level. The bigger question about the form of government, it's really what and who are we as a nation? How do we want to share power? And what does development mean for the people? I think these are fundamental questions that we need to ask. Because the whole clamor, for a return to parliamentarianism is just drawn from, the failure of political leadership to deliver, but also how we've seen politicians and political elites have amassed a lot of political power to advance the common good. Instead, it's been used to fight inter-elite wars or for primitive accumulation of wealth. And so whether it's parliamentarianism or presidential system of government, if you don't deal with the question of who are we, what are we, and how we want to share power, we will still be back to this conversation. And so I am not particularly drawn to any system of government. I'm more concerned about the fundamental issues that we need to deal with, which is what is Nigeria? Who are members of this country and this geographical community that we call Nigeria? And does everyone have a place? What is the philosophy guiding public leadership? Is it public service? These are the fundamental questions. And if we don't address them, there is no form or system that is going to help you answer that question.
Yeah. So you agree with the Patriots? I'm sure you heard about them. They had a conference some weeks back that believed that Nigeria would need to sit down and talk. And I've spoken to a couple of them. And when I asked them about question about insecurity, devolution, they said it still goes back to what you just said. Who are we? What are we? Do we want to live together? If yes, how, where, and when? So do you think we really still need to sit down and discuss as a nation?
I think it's important to underscore that the whole concept of sitting down to speak is not a one-off exercise.
Okay.
Because when you think about power sharing, when you think about a community, there is a great need to continue to have conversations about power relations, about distribution of power, distribution of wealth. It is important, especially for a nation that is a creation of regional and ethnic pact. There is an agreement, whether it is forced or it is voluntary, there's an agreement. Time to time, we need to come to the table to negotiate the terms of the agreement. It doesn't make sense that the federal government has so much powers that it lords it over the component units and the state. It doesn't work that way, especially if we're a federal republic of Nigeria. We've got to have that conversation.
So, yeah, I was going to ask you about voter apathy before, I came up with a follow-up question. So you've said it also in the past. I listen to a lot of things you say and write. You complain that there's a lot of voter apathy. So this is going to be a two-question in one. I'm talking about voter apathy and compulsory voting. I know Yiaga and you are the executive director, didn't mention that compulsory voting should not be a must. So we talk now, the question is voter apathy. What can be done to increase the number of people that vote? For example, the last election, we had over 90 million registered voters. I mean, the outcome, considering the eventual winner had just 8 million plus, the second and the third person had 6-point-something million thereabout. So, and to imagine that the winner at the end of the day had just 30-something% of the total vote cast, so which of course can be said to be pan-Nigerian in mandate of shape or form. So why do you think voting should not be made compulsory, and what can be done about voter apathy?
So first off, there's a reason why people don't come out to vote. One is lack of trust in the electoral process, and you can't blame people. Really, because why should they spend and waste their time, to participate in a process that does not guarantee, the integrity? That's one. Secondly, a lot of times people are not coming out to cast their vote because of the failure of governance, and that democracy is not delivering its promise of improvements in their socioeconomic conditions. So there's no connection between, voting and the quality of life. And thirdly, is the fact that when you have this zero-sum nature of our politics, it increases the tempo and the temperature of politics to the extent that people start appropriating violence as a way of political contestation. And that itself discourages people to come out to cast their vote. So there are a plethora of reasons why people don't, show up to cast their vote. So if you want to fix that, is to just turn these reasons that I've mentioned upside down. One, ensures that you inspire trust and confidence on the part of people. If people trust that their votes will count, they will show up. If governance delivers, people would see the reason why they should come out to cast their vote. Because participation in election does matter. Politicians, political elite, political leaders determine your life. They determine the quality of your life. So you have to be interested, in getting out to cast your vote at elections. When you talk about compulsory voting, I and Yiaga Africa are completely averse to compulsory voting. We're not opposed to the rationale, because the rationale is to increase turnout in elections. Because when people show up for elections, the net effect is democratic legitimacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
That the outcome is a election of the vast majority of the people. But you cannot compel people, to cast their vote or come out at elections, because democracy is about freedom. Not voting is another form of political participation. So you can't compel people to cast their vote. In any case, when you compel people, what you probably have is a forced outcome, because people are not showing up out of their free will. And it takes away the whole vitality and the whole notion of freedom as a fundamental and foundational principle of democracy. And as an organization that defends rights, we thought that that particular proposal was antithetical to human rights, and really it deviates from democratic principles. So completely averse, and opposed to compulsory voting. Instead, we should encourage people and make them see the reason why they should come out and cast their votes during elections.
Oh, wow. So let's quickly look at the judiciary and the legislature. I'm going to make it a twin one again, because everything is related, actually. And I know I've heard you speak about all these things in the past. So it's always good to know why you said this and that. But let's start with judicial reforms. The judiciary is the last arbiter in election resolution. Somebody I'm sure you know very well, Professor Dean Kalu, wrote a book recently, Electorate, and it gives tons and tons of examples, and our society, our political stratosphere is replete with examples of people, politicians, governors, and senators that were solely the creation of the judiciary, not the people in any shape or form. So now, what do you think the judiciary needs to do better than it's been doing? I mean, the role is probably never going to change, but should they just have that overall power? For example, my last guest, Jubelo Kutekwa, mentioned that the onus should not be on the loser to go to court and prove his case. It should be on the winner to prove that he met all the electoral requirements, for example, because we've seen cases whereby even INES does not give this supporting document to help bolster a loser's case. So you tell us what you think the judiciary is doing badly and what they need to do better. Then on legislative framework, do you think the law is okay? My last guest, which I'm sure you know also, Kutekwa, said, look, all our laws are okay. It's just the implementation and the application of what the law says that we do not really implement. He even went to talk about the Constitution. He said there's nothing wrong with Constitution. He gave an example of what the current Attorney General of Nigeria said. He said, if you put a bad person in charge of a good law, you will not do the right thing. But if you put a good person even in charge of a bad law, the tendencies that will do the right thing is high. So now, in a scenario where most of the people in the legislature are beneficiary of the status quo, do you think anything can ever change? So the question is basically on the role of the judiciary, what they're doing wrongly, what needs to be done better. Then the legislature, what needs to be done, especially with the 2002 electoral law as amended. Over to you, Samson.
Thank you very much. I think with respect to the judiciary, I think that the judiciary needs to rise, to the occasion to assert its own independence. And it needs to, one, deal with the question of judicial misconduct. Because we've seen a deviation, from the standard basic principle of judicial precedent, where we've seen the judges have deviated from judicial precedent. And that itself is problematic in every respect. And so it is important that the judiciary rises to the occasion and sanctions judicial misconduct. Because these whole conflicting judgments that we see happen across board, it's just a question of judicial corruption. And that has been, clearly articulated in the Electorate that was authored by Professor Odinkalu. But we've also seen senior lawyers, speak to this issue. And there's a reason why judicial review is a cornerstone, of any democracy.
Mm.
And if people don't feel that they will get justice from the courts, then we are in big trouble.
Mm.
That is why the courts need to rise to the occasion and live up, to this, aphorism that it is the last hope of the common man. Because currently, that is really contested due to prevailing, and questionable judicial resolutions that we've seen to electoral disputes that have come to the courts. I think on the part of the legislature, there's a great deal of work that needs to be done. And one, we need statesmen in our legislative houses. And these statesmen should do nothing, but think about what's in the overall interest of our electoral process. What will ensure that our electoral process is devoid of political capture and devoid of manipulation? They need to protect, and think about the overall and the common good. That's one. The second is whose priorities make it to the final version, of the electoral bill. And that itself is something that we need to check as well, because citizens have highlighted key priorities and that those key priorities need to be reflected in the bill, but they need to conclude the amendment process in good time to allow for, um, INEC to issue guidelines, and also allow stakeholders to understand the electoral law before we go into, an election. And I think that both institutions, whether it's the judiciary or the legislature, they are very central to any successful reform process. But at the end of the day, it's the way citizens engage these institutions that matters. And that's why vigilance is critical for any reform process to be successful. And I think that citizens are demonstrating that, yes, they've not lost hope on these institutions. That's why they're engaging these institutions, whether through public hearings or through submission of petitions.
I was reading your profile. I noticed that you've been around the world on election monitoring. I mean, you've observed elections, South Africa, even in the US and all that. And some part of Africa, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and all that. Can you compare your experience in those countries? Maybe take one or two countries, preferably in Africa, and compare to ours. I mean, let's look at Ghana, for example. The last election, they've not even released the official tally, and the incumbent vice president who was running as president for his party congratulated the current president who won eventually. So I mean, that's Ghana has transited from party in power to opposition seamlessly, continuously. I think we've done it just once. So what do you think they are doing differently? Because I've had guests here that even shared the opinion that we, the people, the citizens, are the problem. That our politicians, our leadership, are a reflection of who we really are. There seems to be a lot of inherent dishonesty in the land. Look at our traditional institution, religious institution. People tend to speak from both sides of the mouth. So compared to a country like Ghana, I mean, Anglophone in nature, colonized by Britain, what are they doing differently from us?
Well, there are a couple of things. For instance, there's a culture of transparency.
Okay.
The culture of transparency. When you think about Ghana, when you think about South Africa, you think about Liberia and other countries, is that the electoral commissions proactively disclose and share information. And that's one thing Nigeria needs to learn from those countries and those electoral commissions. Transparency as a culture and practice, and not, ad hoc in the way you conduct the business of election management. The second thing that we need to learn is the level of political socialization in those countries. And you see people and citizens and political actors engage in constructive debates about issues. It doesn't mean that issues around identity don't define the politics in those countries. They do, but they elevate public discourse and focus more on the issues. And that's something we can learn. The other thing that, we can also learn from those countries is the fact that you really have to emphasize and put people at the center of elections. It's not like in those countries there's no vote buying. It's not like there's no voter enticement, but the politicians see the value of people. And so they have high regard for the choices that people make. So they will do everything to mobilize people to actually come out to cast their vote. In fact, in South Africa, on the day of elections, parties are allowed to set up caravans, outside the polling station to campaign and get people out because they cherish the right to vote. But when you look at in our own case, we don't. Instead, we prefer to pay people to stay away as a way of diluting and reducing the influence that their votes will create in the course of elections. But when you look at the turnout for those elections, look at Ghana. Ghana was somewhere around 68 or so percent. It's even lower than the last time. We have not even gotten up anywhere near 50%. And so there are things that we can learn from those countries. But those countries can also learn something from Nigeria. And that's the whole process of our results management and how at different levels, the way we have structured it. What is in practice may be different, but the way we've structured our results collation process compared to the others, there are things they can learn from us. For instance, in Ghana learned the different levels of collation from Nigeria, because we have 4 levels of collation for presidential elections. Because if you have a country like Nigeria with 174,000 polling units, and you have a central point of collation, the chances that the systems will crash or there are rooms for error is quite high. So those are some of the issues when you look at these different countries and jurisdictions.
Do you think we have the technology to conduct a free and fair election, considering how much has been invested in the past?
Absolutely. We do have the technology to conduct free and fair elections. But we must know that technology is an enabler, is a tool, is a means to an end. It's not an end itself. Technology has its own vulnerabilities. The bigger question is whether the actors, the personal integrity of those actors is what is really critical. Because the cost of our elections is just driven by the fact that we have a predatory political class that wants to secure power at all costs. And that's why the state is spending a lot of money providing all sorts of security features on ballot papers and the result sheets just to protect the process from our politicians and some of our ruling political elite that want power at all costs.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the new chairman of INEC. Clearly from his CV, he's eminently qualified and all that. But I'll change my mind. I'll go to another question. I will allow him to prove himself, I'll let him,
That's what I was going to say as well.
I will allow him I'll be fair to him, allow him to prove himself, then the rest is history. Because it does look like everything Nigeria today, from the president to the lowest cadre on the street in any local government award, it is history time for everybody. It's a time to do the right thing. Doesn't matter who you are. The world is watching, and history will judge for the INEC chairman, for the president, for the governors, for everybody. We all have a role to play. So time will tell. So my final question to you is this. With your experience, what you've seen, I know you've done a lot of research on election in Nigeria. I know you're an authority on it. What do you see? Is there light at the end of the tunnel? What's our worst case scenario? You speak a lot of hope. You say there's a lot of citizens engagement because you are engaging, but there's still people that are forlorn. They're not too positive. And 2027, I dare to say, it's going to be the most strategic election in the history of Nigeria. Do you see hope at the end of the tunnel? What do you see at least from your side of the prison? What do you see?
I am very optimistic. I'm very optimistic about Nigeria's democracy. And partly because I have seen how citizens, despite attempts by political actors to oppress and silence their voices, have continued to speak out. I have seen where citizens organizing have pushed the National Assembly to suspend, passage and consideration of certain draconian bills. I've seen how the state have been forced to delay the implementation of a particular policy because citizens actually speak. But one of the concerns we really have is that you have a situation where we are gradually, eroding every gains that we have recorded. For instance, when you think about the electoral technology, the beavers and the IREF that were a game changer, the politicians have done everything possible to rubbish, all the efforts. And there's a lot of retrogression that is being experienced, in this particular space. Secondly, is the fact that we may not have the opportunity of having a credible opposition that enhances the competitive nature of the next elections. And that itself, it's not good for democracy. So those are concerns, that I have. The other concern, like Yiaga Africa mentioned in our State of Electoral Integrity report, is that the next election might be the most expensive election and perhaps even the most compromised election if steps are not taken to safeguard the process. When you look at the economy, when you look at the economic hardship that Nigerians face, when you look at the fact that next year there will be the enforcement or implementation of a new tax regime, you would expect that people, will really struggle to make informed choices without necessarily deferring to either enticement or procurement of votes by our politicians. And I think the politicians are amassing a lot of resources because the highest bidder is what defines and what determines the outcome of elections. So one is really concerned, about that particular issue. So these are concerns, but I'm optimistic that citizens are not folding their hands and losing faith in the process. They are engaging. We just need to get more Nigerians, out, and that's why the transition in INEC is very critical. How this process is managed, it will determine, whether citizens trust that their votes will count and they will show up to vote at the next elections.
Thank you very much, Samson Itodo, for your time. I know you're very busy. Thank you for creating time for us. And keep up the good work. And we look forward to
thank you.
we'll bring you back again as things evolve. Thank you once again. So to all our viewers, you heard from him.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there is hope. Don't give up. Yes, it does look like things are a bit shaky, but you just have to keep grinding. Consistency might just be the way out there. There are over 200 million Nigerians. If all of you come out and do what you got to do, man, the politicians will have to respect your wishes. Thank you. See you next week, Friday. Thank you, Samson, once again. Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.